Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 best spiritual books that had a major impact on his life journey is Steve Kanji Ruhl. A Zen Buddhist minister, Dharma teacher, author, scholar, mystic and spiritual guide, and self-confessed moonlight dancer, and we'll find out more about that one a bit later. Kanji Ruhl is an innovative Zen Buddhist minister, ordained in the Zen Peacemaker order, now teaching independently through his Touch the Earth Cyber Sangha, a Buddhist chaplain at Deerfield Academy and a Buddhist advisor at Yale. He's spoken or taught at Harvard Center for World Religions, Yale Divinity School, the International Conference on Socially Engaged Buddhism, the Omega Institute, and more. And he's the author of the award-winning, critically acclaimed spiritual memoir, Appalachian Zin, Journeys in Search of True Home, from the American Heartland to the Buddha Dharma. Steve Kanji Ruhl, welcome. We've lost your sound, Steve. There you are, I think.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
We're back. I'm sorry.
We're back. That's okay. These things happen.
Yeah.
So now tell me about your relationship with books, and also what it was like for you having to just come up with 10 books. Probably from a lifetime's reading, that's quite a hard task.
It is a hard task, but it was a fun task despite being challenging. I really enjoyed it. And my relationship to reading, I think, is interesting from the point of view of a Zen practitioner, because in Zen Buddhism, there's often an emphasis on moving beyond words and letters. And there's a suspicion about the written word. And it's often considered to be a transmission beyond the scriptures. So for me to be both a writer and a reader and a Zen practitioner, and to live in harmony with this suspicion about the written word is a fascinating process. But before I became a Zen practitioner, throughout my life, books were invaluable to me. I grew up in the central Appalachian region of Pennsylvania, which is what my book is about. And books were both an escape route for me and a way to discover new horizons that I never really had known existed for me. So they were really a lifeline and part of a miraculous exploration of a larger world.
Well, you on your bio it says that you grew up in the backwoods, a trailer parks of that particular mill industry, Pennsylvania, and that must have been. Was it not a challenge for you in terms of being able to read the kinds of books that you wanted to read?
It was a challenge in some ways. I was very fortunate in that my
It looks like
education.
I think we lost you there, Steve.
Aha, okay.
Start again. It was
Okay.
a challenge.
It was a challenge, but I was also very fortunate because both of my parents were highly enamored of learning and education. And in fact, we were the only family I knew that had some books in the living room instead of a gun rack. full of hunting guns for deer season and so on. So I had that advantage. I also had some wonderful teachers at school who made books available to me, and we were able to go to the library every week. And the town library was just a den of marvels for me, and I loved it from the moment I stepped in. So I did have access to some of those resources.
And what about your friends at school? Did they, how did they feel that you had books and perhaps they had guns?
Mm. Well, I did have some friends by the time I got to high school, and also in elementary school, there were some friends who were able to harmonize both of those worlds, the book world and the deer hunting gun world. So it wasn't completely alienating. And increasingly, as I got older, I was able to find some like-minded peers and flourish in that way. So, but it was still always a challenge. And there was also a stigma attached to being a person who had intellectual ambitions or artistic ambitions. So it was necessary from an early age to learn how to be independent and defiant in that way.
So at what age did you become interested in, Buddhism?
Mm. Yeah, good question. By the time I was a teenager, I was starting to have a vague, sort of inchoate interest. I didn't really know what I was exploring or how to find what I was seeking. But I would walk along the creek, or I would walk through the woods and just be aware of my breathing and just be aware of what was around me without even knowing that that was basically the essence of a meditation practice. And it wasn't until my late 30s that I was actually beginning to formally look into spiritual practice. And I investigated a few possibilities, but the first time I walked into a zendo, I immediately felt that I was home, and that feeling has never left me. Although I'm not a Zen chauvinist. I'm really open to a lot of spiritual possibilities, but that's really my home.
Do you recall the first spiritual book that made a big impact on you?
Well, the very first spiritual books that made a big impact were the Bible stories that I was hearing in Sunday school. And we had a little book at home. Well, actually, there were some Bible story books at home too. And but we had a picture book called God's World and Johnny. And it was about a little boy named Johnny visiting his grandparents. And I remember this vividly. He would be walking through his grandparents' farm on a rainy day in the springtime and recognizing that everything he saw, the ducklings and the cows, everything was part of God's world. And living where I lived, I could really relate to that environment.
Mm. Well, let's talk about your first book on your list,
Hmm.
and it's a book that you recommend to your students as the best book ever written in America about Zen Buddhism. And its
Mm.
title is Everyday Zen Love and Work by Charlotte Joko Beck. That was published in
Hmm.
1989. What was it about this book that impressed you so much?
What impressed me so much about Joko's book, Everyday Zen, was the quality she has of very blunt, direct speaking on the printed page about really what the essence of Zen practice is, both in love and in work. And what it's conveying is that there's a quality of lucid awareness and complete presence. And she conveys this in a tone that, um, to me, was like drinking a glass of refreshing cold water when I was parched and didn't even really know that I was thirsty necessarily. But that kind of directness and bluntness and simplicity, I think, is just tremendously, tremendously refreshing.
Mm. The second book was published by the author at his own expense, condemned as immoral, for containing
Mhm.
previously unmentionable subject matter and now regarded as
Mhm.
a classic of American poetry, Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, published in
Mhm.
1855.
That absolutely. Yes, and discovered by me when I was a teenager in that environment we were talking about a few minutes ago.
Mm.
I would take copy of Leaves of Grass to the woodlands with me and just sit by the creek and read it. And it was so exhilarating. Whitman has this tremendous sense of spiritual openness and welcoming. And the expansive quality of that was a revelation to me. And there is also some kind of incipient understanding of Brahmanic Hinduism uh, permeating Leaves of Grass. Those Asian texts were just starting to be translated, and Whitman was one of the first to read them. So there's this kind of rapture and this kind of all-embracing enthusiasm for life in the midst of everything you just described so well. Part of that unmentionable quality that made the book scandalous is his complete acceptance of the body as well as the soul, and including the erotic body. And it's just wonderful.
Mhm. Book 3, a book of compelling mystery and magic that took you far beyond the standard masculine template of the hero's journey. And it is Women Who Run with the Wolves, Myths and Stories
Y-
of the Wild Woman Archetype, Clarissa Pinkola Estes. That's a popular book, comes up
It's
again
a
and again.
and it's easy to understand
Mm.
why. It's a terrifically eye-opening and empowering book, and, for me reading it as a man, it opened up, doors into, women's experience of a wild, luminous spirituality, and I know my women friends have said something similar in their experience, but, uh, to see these mythic tales liberated from the traditional male hero's journey and to see the different dimensions that open up when we look at the uh, the journeys of maidens or crones or other women who defy the norms and realize themselves through their own heroism and their uh, indefatigable courage in going forward, even into the darkness, even into those underworld places that are so frightening, and to come out transformed as a result.
How revelationary was that for you personally?
Well, it was revolutionary, but it also confirmed what I'd also already been experiencing through the spiritual journeys of my women friends. I came to Women Who Run with the Wolves because so many of my women friends had read it and recommended it, and it kept coming up again and again and again. As you say, it's a very popular book. So eventually, I realized it was time. And for somebody like me, who's always been interested in Jungian psychology and Jungian archetypal approaches, it was revolutionary for me to see how this really opens up into the sacred feminine.
Mm. Book number 4, The Gospel of Thomas, The Hidden Sayings. Now, it was difficult at first to work out whose translation, but I think what you wanted was Marvin Meyer, wasn't it? Marvin
hmm
Meyer.
I,
Mm,
I do use that one. Yeah. Helmut Kester, there's some others, but yeah, yeah,
mm.
that's a good one.
Why
hmm
this one in particular?
Well, I think that it uses the available scholarship in a way that's very fresh, and it feels like a contemporary reading while being authentic to the source material. So I like that one. And the Gospel of Thomas, as some of your listeners may know, is a non-orthodox, non-canonical gospel, one of the earliest, and basically it consists of sayings attributed to Jesus. I think, well, I refer to them as Jesus koans because they take you often into unexpected territory, and they can be baffling and bewildering. They can be tremendously illuminating, and they're often quite contradictory, and it leaves you with as many questions as answers. And I think that really gets to the essence of the mystery of Jesus and what he was attempting to accomplish during his mission on earth.
Mm. You said that it confounds our expectations while leading us into surprising and sometimes unsettling revelations. Tell me about some
Mhm.
of those unsettling revelations.
Well, some of the unsettling revelations have to do with the ferocity of the message that Jesus imparts to his disciples from time to time. Um, we may tend to think of Jesus as a peacemaker, and he certainly is, but some of what's unsettling in the Gospel of Thomas has to do with his saying that he comes to bring fire, he comes to burn the earth. There's a strong apocalyptic message, and and he can be really both firm and ferocious in imparting that message, and I think that catches some people off guard.
Mm. You said that a fine companion to this would be the Gospel of Mary of Magdala, translated by Karen King.
Mhm.
Why do you say that?
Because as we were saying about women who run with the wolves, it balances the traditional male perspective that we get through the Gospel of Thomas with an extremely empowering sacred feminine in which Mary Magdala is clearly the chosen disciple and clearly the one who Jesus confided in. And for some of your listeners who may not be familiar with it, the setting, and it's very brief because it's fragmentary, there are a lot of lacunae in it, and these gaps prevent us from really knowing a lot of what was trying to be conveyed. But within those brief pages, there's a lot of information that Mary is imparting to the other disciples, including the message that Jesus gives about sin. He says there is no sin, it's an illusion. There's information about the soul's rise to heaven and so on. So I think it's a very good companion piece to the Gospel of Thomas to hear Mary speaking for herself.
Mm, yeah. Book number 5, Total Freedom: The Essential Krishnamurti by Krishnamurti. Not quite sure when that was published, possibly 1996?
It sounds about right.
Mm,
It sounds about right. Yeah. Yeah, Krishnamurti is fascinating to me because he was somebody who was essentially christened as a youth as the world's savior by a legion of devotees, and he was groomed for that role. And he became more and more skeptical as he grew older. And by the time that he was scheduled to be acclaimed as the world's savior, he addressed this legion of followers and completely renounced the role and essentially chastised them and told them that they were foolish to be handing their power over to others, and that the real spiritual journey is inward, and each person has to do it for himself or herself or their self. And he never deviated from that for the rest of his long life. He was always trying to help people find their own liberation through their own seeking and their own journey, and always disavowing any attempts to treat him as a guru or a sage. So the title of that collection of talks, Total Freedom, really exemplifies what he was about. And there's a tone of exuberance, I think, throughout, because when questioners are approaching him with metaphysical queries, he's very direct and very keen on making sure that they are able to find their own answers and not rely exclusively on him.
Takes a very strong character to reject the crown, doesn't it?
It certainly
Yeah.
does. It
Speaks
certainly
volumes
does.
about his character.
It does. It speaks volumes indeed. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And you said that it includes selections from his early works, his commentaries on living and his discourses on life, the self,
Hmm.
meditation, sex, and love. What does he say about sex and love?
Well, he approaches it in a way that embraces a traditional Hindu Brahmanic view that there's a place in family life for sex and love, but that it also can become a snare if there's too much attachment. And so there has to be a middle way approach to valorizing the erotic without becoming entrapped by it.
Yeah. And that also takes a strong person.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So now, book number 6, Radical Remission, Surviving
Mm,
Cancer Against All Odds, by the researcher, lecturer, and counselor in integrative oncology, Dr. Kelly A. Turner. This was published in 2014, and you had cancer yourself 7 years ago, didn't you?
mhm.
Did you read this book after or before?
Actually, during.
Mm.
So, as soon as I got my diagnosis in 2017, I was being urged by oncologists to undertake traditional, conventional surgery, radiation, or chemotherapy, but those have very dire side effects. And I knew intuitively and instantly that I was not going to do that, but I didn't know exactly what I would do. But I did have faith that my body could somehow heal itself if I could find the means to do it. And as it happened, I began to also discover that the new classes of immunotherapy drugs were starting to become successful. And I wondered, well, could I do this replicating what the immunotherapy drugs do, but without the drugs? And so in investigating this, I came quickly to Kelly Turner's book, Radical Remission. And what it revealed to me is that radical remissions do happen, but they aren't widely publicized. And she gives case histories of people who either have combined conventional medicine with natural healing or relied exclusively on natural healing. And the latter was my course of action. And through working with a medical team and using advanced Western medical technology for lab reports, I relied on natural healing in terms of herbal and mushroom supplements and anti-cancer medicinal diet, meditation, exercise, and so on, energy work like Reiki and Tai Chi, and all of which are described in Kelly Turner's book, Radical Remission, as case histories of people who used them successfully. And within a year and a half, an MRI at Dana-Farber, which of course is a world-renowned cancer research center, showed that half the tumor had vanished. And by January of 2020, it was completely gone. And so I've been in remission now for starting on 4 years. So her book was informative, but also inspiring, because reading those case histories gave me the conviction that, well, if these people could do it, there's no reason why I can't do it too. And the reason I put it on a book of spiritual, a list of spiritual books, is that the spiritual practice, the meditation, the faith in the life force, the connection with the life force is absolutely crucial. And the people interviewed in her book make that point as well. So it's a highly spiritual book.
Yeah, I was really intrigued, when I was reading about her. She created the Radical Remission Project, and it said while getting her PhD at the University of California, Berkeley, she was shocked to discover that no one was studying episodes of radical or unexpected remission. And, that's crazy. It's like nobody was studying the placebo effect for a long time. I mean, if something is
That's right.
working, it's worth studying.
Well, exactly. That's what I think too. I totally agree with you, Sandie. And these are these are events that science should be embracing and investigating rather than ignoring or condemning. And when science is ready to look at them, I think that we'll start to make some medical advances that are very significant.
Mm. And she went on a 10-month trip around the world, 10 different countries, interviewing holistic healers and radical remission cancer survivors, etc. I mean, she really did her research, didn't she?
She really did. She did her undergraduate degree at Harvard, and so she honed her research skills both at Harvard and in her graduate work. And so it's a thoroughly researched and documented book. It's not just pop medicine.
Mm.
It's very substantive.
Yeah, yeah. And she also presents 9 common themes that she believes may even help terminal patients turn their lives around. Do you remember what those themes are?
Well, I don't know if I can remember all 9, the 9 keys of healing, but they're very much congruent with what I did. So the ones that I mentioned are pretty much in alignment with what's in her book. So just to quickly review that, um, herbal and mushroom supplements, anti-cancer medicinal diet, which for me essentially means vegan, organic, and no sugar, and also energy work like Reiki and Tai Chi. She also mentions, and I value this too, loving support, having a loving support network. She mentions trusting your intuition, which was also vital to my path. And yeah, I think we have maybe 4 or 5 there, but yeah, the others are worth looking at too.
Certainly a standout book. Well, we're going to take a
Mhm.
short break now. You're listening to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's 10 Best Spiritual Books weekly interview series, and sharing the 10 books that influenced his life journey is Zen Buddhist minister, Dharma teacher, author, scholar, mystic and spiritual guide, Steve Kanji Ruhl, author of the book Appalachian Zin, Journeys in Search of True Home from the American Heartland to the Buddha Dharma. We'll be back with the rest of Steve's 10 best spiritual books after the break. Stay tuned.
Om Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com. Click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, You become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
I wanted to talk to you about a program called the Dream Arc and a retreat that we're doing, and I want to invite you along. And the Dream Arc is a dream technology, and even the latest physics is suggesting now that reality is not what we think it is, that it's kind of a construct, and that the Dream Arc teaches us how to use the full operating system to navigate our brain frequencies between waking and sleeping and dreaming, and to move through the inner realms and the outer realms seamlessly. And you will work in the Dream Arc with certain animals that will come to you, maybe in real life, maybe through your intuition, in magical ways, or perhaps through, just dreams that come to you. It's filled, the Dream Arc, with invitations and suggestions and tasks that you choose intuitively. You choose the ones for you. You don't know what you're choosing, but they come to you. So please join us as we dive down the wormhole into the Dream Arc, and let's see what happens.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back, Steve Kanji Ruhl, and I should be calling you Kanji, not Steve. Book number 7, The Triumphal Sun, a study of the works of, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Jalaluddin Rumi, by Anne-Marie Schimmel, 1978.
Yes. So most of your listeners are probably familiar with Rumi. He's sometimes cited as the most best-selling poet in American bookstores. And of course, he's 13th century Islamic Sufi mystic. And he started out as a very staid, very conventional lawyer and family man. He was the son of an illustrious Islamic mystic, but it took him a long time to open up to his own mystical path of discovering the sacred in terms of esoteric practice. And once he did, Rumi sort of burst into an unprecedented spiritual illumination that was highly rhapsodic and alive, and thousands and thousands of verses, very few of which have been translated into English. But those that have been translated into English sometimes are written to conform with our own contemporary expectations. And Rumi can really go much more deeply than that. A lot of what Rumi's investigating has to do with the mystical path of diminishing the small ego self, which in his tradition is called nafs, so that it's possible to achieve full union with ultimate reality, or Allah. Often envisioned as the divine face of the beloved. So to pull the veil away from the divine face of the beloved and just be completely drunken, metaphorically, with ecstatic rapture, and to be dancing that dance. So Anne-Marie Schimmel's book approaches Rumi with the intellectual acumen of a scholar, but also with a sense of the passion that Rumi's work is imbued with. And I think it's an excellent place to start for anybody who really wants to look into Rumi more deeply. My first book, Enlightened Contemporaries, focuses in part on Rumi, and Anne-Marie Schimmel's book was really instructive for me in finding my way into that body of work.
Book number 8, Tartuffe, Comedy in 5 Acts by Molière, translated by Richard Wilbur, original
Mm.
was published in 1669, and I think a more recent version was 2004.
Right. Yeah, this at first might seem like an odd choice
Mm.
for a list of 10 spiritual books. But the reason I chose it is that I think it's of perennial interest because speaking only at this point of American Buddhism, there's been an unsettling tendency for American Buddhism to accommodate itself to an American culture of consumerism and celebrity worship. Historically, Buddhism has adapted itself to the cultures it found itself in after it migrated from India, whether it was China or Japan or Korea, Southeast Asia, and so on. Coming to the United States, there's been that temptation to accommodate itself to the influence of marketing forces. And Moliere's play Tartuffe is about uh, a scheming religious hypocrite, and it's hilarious and not only pertinent but hilarious. And Richard Wilbur's translation is elegant and light and deft, and it's just a delight to read. And Moliere's skewers these false religious pretensions and the tendency of people to be gullible and to find themselves complicit in this kind of religious hypocrisy. So I put it in simply as a caution,
Excuse me.
and of course, and just to remind people that, especially given some of the scandals that we've seen in American Buddhism in recent years, having to do with abuses of power and sexuality that are quite disturbing, it's always necessary to remain vigilant and to trust our deepest instincts about what's authentic and what's not, and be careful about giving our power away.
Yeah, that's the most important message, isn't it? We don't
Mhm,
need to give our power away to anybody.
absolutely. Yeah, that's right. I agree, Sandie.
Yeah. Book number 9, Dogen's Extensive Record, a translation of the Ihe? Is that the
Ehe, good.
Ehe?
Yeah, very close. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
What is
Ehe,
the
good.
Ehe?
Well, so this is a collection of talks or Dharma talks that Dogen gave at his monastery in a remote location of north central Japan in the 13th century. So he and Rumi were actually contemporaries, and he's the other person, along with Francis of Assisi, that I focus on in my first book, Enlightened Contemporaries. But in any case, so Dogen brought Soto Zen Buddhism to Japan from China, and he moved to this remote wilderness location with monks and nuns. And this particular book is a transcription of talks that he gave over several decades, written down by a monastic scribe as he was speaking them. So it gives us uh, Dogen over 750 years of distance from us in all of his warmth and immediacy. You can really feel him alive on the page, and what he's conveying. It's a little bit like what we see in the Gospel of Thomas that we were talking about a little earlier. These these messages that are sometimes very direct and sometimes a bit confounding, because he's also working out of the Japanese and Chinese Chong koan traditions. So they can lead you down some bewildering alleys sometimes. But I think it's a wonderful book. I've read it several times, and I recommend it to my students because, again, it's a good way to find yourself in what Dogen was thinking without having, excuse me, to venture into some of his more challenging and demanding philosophical treatises in his masterwork, the Shobogenzo.
Mm. Book number 10, The Gary Snider Reader, published in 1999.
Yeah, this was an easy choice for me. We were saying at the outset, choosing a list of 10 books from a lifetime of reading is both fun and challenging. This was a pretty easy choice because Gary Snider has been an inspirational model to me for some time. Again, as your listeners may know, he's mostly known as kind of a semi-legendary beat pioneer, literary pioneer. He's won the Pulitzer Prize for poetry, and he was friends with Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and so on. But he spent most of the 60s living in Japan. He was a Zen Buddhist pioneer, American Zen Buddhist pioneer. And he's also a founder of the deep ecology movement. And he's also been instrumental in multicultural approaches to spirituality without cultural appropriation, but with an honest assessment and honoring these traditions, including Native American traditions, and bringing them to Zen practice. He's also been a champion of community and family life, which runs counter sometimes to the stereotype we might have of, the spiritual practitioner sitting alone on a mountaintop. So I think he's multidimensionally inspirational. He's almost 100 years old now. He's got just as sharp an intellect and sensitivity and sense of humor as ever. And I think he's a national treasure.
So that's your 10 best list. If you could have dinner with any one of those authors, who would you choose?
Let's go for Jesus.
Why not go straight for the top?
Why not, man? I mean, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, let's find out what he's all about sitting next to him across the
I'll see
table,
what I can
breaking
do.
bread. Yeah, I appreciate it.
So your book, Appalachian Zin, I mean, when I sent out our newsletter, I think I had only a little bit of space to put a subject line, and I said from something like trailer parks to transcendence. You have
Nice.
gone on an amazing journey. I mean, I love talking to people about their life journeys because, where we begin and where we end up are often so far apart. And to think
Mm.
about, well, how did somebody, navigate that road? Was it an easy journey? Was it a really hard journey?
Oh, it's a really hard journey. It still is. I mean, for all of us, the journey is ongoing all the time. Um, but there was right from an early age, and we were talking about this earlier in the sense of how books were valuable to me, a sense that there was more that could be available, and a kind of hunger for a hunger for the world, really, that I'm still quenching. I mean, it's an endless series of possibilities. So blessed to have a loving, supportive family. My parents were wonderful. If I hadn't had that, the journey called. And the difficult part of the journey when I was younger had to do with living in an environment, again, outside of my own family, that was one of violence, and having to overcome a sense of fear and find my own inner determination and my own defiance. And so, in
Mm.
retrospect, I'm actually grateful for the challenges and the hardships because they did make me a stronger person. And coming finally to this particular form of spiritual practice, and as I alluded to earlier, I'm not a Zen Buddhist chauvinist by any means. In my academic work, I've done a lot of intensive study of all kinds of religious traditions, and I see something of value in all of them. But coming to this particular spiritual tradition of Zen Buddhism took me quite a long time because uh, throughout my 20s, 30s, and almost early 40s, my spiritual path, as I understood it, was art, was being a writer. And that was tremendously nurturing, but eventually I found that it wasn't sufficient, that really it's necessary to have more. And part of the journey, too, has been how to reconcile, how to harmonize as a writer the traditional Western romantic, of course, with a capital R, Western romantic conception of the artist, which is all about self-expression, and harmonize that with a spiritual path that cultivates no self in order to experience no separation from the world. So how to be, excuse me, how to be a writer involved with self-expression, and also a Zen practitioner involved with cultivating no self, is an ongoing tension, but also an ongoing set of possibilities that I enjoy exploring.
So tell me, where does the Moonlight dancer come into this?
I love to dance. I love to
Oh,
dance. I
Moonlight.
always have. And so yeah, and so lately it's been in the moonlight because excuse me, been talking a long time here. It's catching up with my throat. I apologize, but no, I love to dance, and lately it's been in the moonlight because I find that I'm staying up, and the moon is such a wonderful dancing partner. So it really enhances the music.
Okay, I'll take your word for that. You've also published 2 volumes of poems, which I think have great titles. The Constant
Mm,
Yes of Things. I want an explanation of that. And Paintings of Rice
mm,
Cakes Satisfy Hunger. Do they really?
mm. Good question. So the first one, the constant yes of things, actually, I have to give credit where credit is due. That was something that a friend of mine said, and it immediately resonated with me. I think it's so suggestive. Uh, it's so evocative. The constant yes of things. I think it's a statement that speaks to the way the world is constantly affirming itself, constantly presenting itself. Actually, Dogen, who we were speaking of just a few moments ago, spoke of this as well, how everything in the universe is constantly exerting itself as itself and presenting itself. So the constant yes of things. It sounds like something Walt Whitman would have said too. We were talking about him earlier, that sense of affirmation, that exuberant sense of affirmation. So I really loved it. As far as paintings of rice cakes satisfy hunger, that alludes to a traditional Zen Buddhist story. And the traditional statement is that painted rice cakes do not satisfy hunger. And and I think we can all understand what that means. It means that the semblance of something is not going to nourish you. You need the thing itself. Um, so that's basically, pretty common sense. Dogen, as often was his wont, was a contrarian in this and said actually painted rice cakes do satisfy hunger. And by that was that art, uh, painted rice cakes, but any form of art, can satisfy our deep spiritual hunger, at least at some important level. So I chose it as the title of that book of poems because I agree with Dogen. I think paintings of rice cakes do satisfy hunger.
Depends how good they are.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. Good
I
rice cakes.
I
Yeah.
can remember someone once saying that, anyone on a diet, if you want chocolate, just smell the chocolate and it will satisfy the hunger.
Mm.
It is not
No,
true. It
no,
really
no.
isn't. If you're smelling the chocolate, you've got to eat it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's a good point. Yeah, the
Yeah.
the the scent of painted rice cakes too will not satisfy hunger,
Mm.
just like the scent of.
Yeah. So you also wrote the book Enlightened Contemporaries, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
Francis, Dogen, and Rumi, three great mystics of 13th century, and why they matter today. Why do they matter?
Well, I think for several reasons. And I just want to say at the outset that when I began to write that book, it was not long after the September 11th, 2001 attacks. So I knew immediately that I wanted to choose somebody and focus on somebody from a Muslim background, because there was a lot of Islamophobia then, of course. And, um, and then the other two contemporaries fell into place pretty quickly. If I had chosen a different time period, I would have liked to have chosen a woman as well, like Hildegard of Bingen, for example, if I had
Mm,
chosen
yeah,
another time period.
yeah.
But so the way to answer your question is, I think that these three contemporary mystics are relevant today. One is they show us that it's possible to achieve transformation. These were not these were not people with supernatural powers. They were completely ordinary people. They may have had extraordinary powers of diligence and perseverance and capacity for insight, but fundamentally they were like us. And as I said earlier, uh, Rumi started out as a lawyer. Dogen, born into the aristocracy, was searching for a long time. Francis, also born into wealth, was searching for a long time. He originally was basically a playboy, carousing and so on. So they show us the possibility for transformation. They also show us possibilities for exceeding the conventions of our own time. Dogen was centuries ahead of his time in championing women, in asserting that women are fully capable of enlightened awakening just like men. This was unheard of in his time and place. Um, Francis, way ahead of his time in asserting the relationship between humans and the natural world in a way that speaks to us powerfully today during our environmental apocalypse that we're in the midst of now, and it's only going to get worse. Um, and so they're relevant in that way to us. They speak to us as cosmopolitan people who traveled far beyond their places of birth, which was very unusual for their time. They also, I think, represent exemplars of the sacred masculine at a time when I think we need to reconcile the sacred masculine with the sacred feminine, bringing them together. And we're looking for models of the sacred masculine. Where are they? Where can we find them? Well, I think Francis of Assisi is a good model of a sacred masculine. So is Dogen, so is Rumi. And in bringing the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine together, reuniting, coming back together in wholeness, whatever your gender identity is, we all have these archetypes within us. We may express them in terms of our individual gender identity in different ways, in very diverse ways. But so these aren't rigid gender norms when we're talking about sacred masculine, sacred feminine. We're talking about inner archetypes are resonant within all of us. So I think Francis, Dogen, and Rumi show us some of what those possibilities are.
Sounds like you got a book there.
Could be another one, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and very necessary.
Thanks, I agree, yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah,
timely.
yeah, exactly what we need. We're almost out of time. In a very, very short, brief description, tell us about your Touch the Earth
Mm.
Cyber Sangha.
Sure. So this is a cyber sangha in the sense that the people who participate are scattered around the country. I think there's a lot to be said for getting together in person. There's a synergy to that, but we're also finding that meeting online gives us a chance to bridge these geographical boundaries. So I've got people in New Mexico and so on, and we get together for meditation practice, for Dharma talk, for sharing. And people who might be interested can access that through my website, which is just a simple stevekanjiruhl.com.
Mm. Steve Kanji Ruhl, thank you so much for adding your 10 best list to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations.
Oh, thank you, Sandie. This has been really wonderful. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you. For more information about Steve Kanji Ruhl, his Zen training, public Dharma teachings, workshops, and spiritual guidance, and his books, visit his website, Steve Kanji, Kanji, Ruhl, RUHL.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you again. From Kanji.